Welcome to this B2B Bites. I'm so excited to be joined by Jake Cook, CEO of Tadpull and a Harvard professor. Today, we're going to be talking about the hot button topic of AI. So much to talk about here and so much to discuss. So Jake, as we think about AI, in particular for B2B, so for manufacturers and distributors, what do you think the biggest impacts that this, let's call it AI revolution, is going to have on e-commerce?
Well, two things. I think the first part I would say is it is a platform shift, similar to broadband or mobile or even the internet for that matter. So when you kind of frame it in that perspective, we'll see a lot of crazy things happen, but it does represent a whole new way. And the biggest thing is these kind of what they call large language models. And that's a fancy way of saying we can now talk to a robot and get pretty sophisticated answers back in a way that, 18 months or a year ago wasn't really possible. So how does a robot give you an answer? Well, it's usually trained or it learns from lots and lots of data. And so for manufacturers, I think there's this platform shift. And the second piece is like, well, what questions would we want to ask of our data? And if we have that data handy, like what could the robots tell us about it? So for example, with AI, they might say, geez, what are our most profitable products? Well, that's not that fancy, but like what are our best customers buy? When do they buy them? And what are the most profitable products they purchase first? And that's a lot of language there to say that basically like those are patterns that exist in your data that the robots can do. And generative AI or large language model, those fancy terms, means you can start to ask questions of things that you'd like to know, which is really, really powerful. So it should be a force multiplier for your in-house analysts or your labor, if you will, as well.
I love that. For anyone who spent lots of time drilling through spreadsheets, trying to understand what are my most profitable products and kind of compare that to what's driving revenue, which might be different in this case, being able to ask a model to do all of that for you, I think is incredibly powerful. And that's part of, I think, what you can achieve in the back office. As we look to, let's say, the front office, so customer facing, where do you think we might see advances there?
I think customer facing goes without saying, but probably you think about what you can build for an experience on site where a customer, instead of calling, they're either going to be on the phone and they're going to chat, like have a chat experience like Chat GPT or something like that. I'm a plumber. I'm trying to figure out how do I fix this type of fridge. It's making these symptoms. Imagine your site or your digital property becomes that kind of like trusted on-demand support where it can answer questions that nobody's ever seen before. And so I think that's 20% of the search queries typed into Google today, Google's never seen before. And so that same thing's going to start to happen with these small businesses. And manufacturers your clients are probably going to ask you questions you won't know. And then the robots are actually going to learn from your data and be able to answer it better than a support person can. So I think that right off the bat makes for a really easy way for customers with large SKU counts to do something kind of interesting and remarkable.
I love that stat. 20% of the searches have never been searchable. That's a fantastic stat. And I think to your point, if I am a buyer and I'm asking questions, maybe that can be answered by an AI. I think here about complex configurators maybe, and this isn't that complex an example, but let's say I'm installing an HVAC into an office building. I've picked the systems I'm going to use. The AI or the large language model, whichever I'm using, maybe knows the pieces, the parts that fit with the system I've installed, and it can start to plan out what my order here could look like. And I think that's really interesting. So do you have any thoughts on kind of that side of it, maybe quoting and configuration, how that may work?
Oh, I think that's a great example. And for example, say we're putting together an HVAC system, there might be parts that are associations with different parts of that system that you would normally, a human would know, or they would map it on the back end of the product for like a product recommendation engine, for example, where the robots can identify that as well. The other part is, maybe there's certain parts of the implementation that are really tricky. Like you've got to get the electrical to this box at this amperage or whatever. The robots can also start to compile lots of different disparate information and bring those together. That would make for a really remarkable installation experience as well. And at the end of the day, you want that customer that's installing the HVAC system to come to your property or your business and say, it's so easy for me to do my job. And I got another HVAC system coming up. And of course, I'm just going to go through that same experience in order again.
Yeah, I love that. And even simple use cases. Twin Liquors, who are a liquor distributor here in Austin, Texas, I recently was talking to them about how they could utilize AI. And they said, well, like imagine a new bar owner comes onto my site and they type in and say, hey, I would like to fill my bar with 200 bottles, the most popular bottles of liquor in the US. Build an order for me. Done. That time that normally go into that, right?
Yeah. And these are things that would take people weeks, if not months, to figure out, and you're getting it done in minutes. I mean, it really is. It's just a force multiplier in labor. It's incredible.
Yeah, for sure. Quite incredible when you think of it. Think of the power that it can have to change B2B. Very, very interesting. So obviously these aren't quite here yet. One of the things that I like to tell people is that, AI is actually, and language models have been in e-commerce and in B2B for a while. We've all interacted with chatbots, and we've always used complex searches that are smart searches that react to, my previous product history and to the cohort that I'm in. Do you have examples of merchants maybe that you've worked with? And you don't have to obviously name their names, but who have already using these technologies to improve their buyer experience?
Yes. There's this whole thing called prompt engineering, which basically is like how you prompt the robot to do. And there's a little bit of an art to that of, where you would say, I'm a HVAC implementation specialist. I'm trying to figure out the most cost-effective way for my client to move this much air volume and these types of temperatures and things. What are the first steps? And so merchants, I think, can today start prototyping and playing around with this stuff in a really like lo-fi way that kind of starts to predict that. So for example, we might find like, okay, new customers buy these types of products within their second, purchase or whatever. We can ask the robot, hey, here's our order history. What's the most, purchased product within the first 60 days? That's a simple question in theory. But once we know that, then we can say, okay, we're going to send an email to that customer at day 45 because they buy around day 53 and surface that out. So we'll use some of those types of things to start to drive the customer journey off these stuff as well. But it starts with just very basic questions. And then the idea of even coding, which is typically kind of a domain that's a little bit more not used a lot in B2B in-house. I mean, even that can start to be done now just in Python, write me this thing to do this thing and feed me this data. And it's like, it comes back and it's pretty remarkable. Now it can hallucinate. We could talk a little about what some of the other things that the robots can get a little confused on too as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you kind of mentioned their coding. I know, we both yourselves and us as BigCommerce, we work a lot with merchants who are using ERPs like, NetSuite. And I've heard of our merchants who are using large language models to write suite scripts for them. Right? Integration just became incredibly easy. And in particular, I think with manufacturers and distributors, often using customized integrations that aren't standard, non-standard integrations or non-standard processes, where you can explain that to a model and then have it write the code for your integration. It's hugely powerful.
Yes, and the cool part is these are trained on all these great examples of code around the internet. So again, it can be a little. You got to kind of make sure trust but verify is the joke with generative AI, but to the point of like some people on our team, I was looking at some of their code and I was like, wow, this is really good. And they're like, so you really learned, you come a long way in a short amount of time. Like, oh no, this is ChatGPT. But this person understands what they're trying to analyze in a customer data set, and they're able to leverage Python and all these, examples around the internet is trained on to like get really good, quick examples. So I think for people in-house, especially with merchants that have huge SKU counts, there's so much gold in the data that typically is locked up behind Excel or an ERP system that now can be started with a simple question.
Yeah, I think spot on there with the large SKU counts. We work with a lot of automotive distributors, Aces and Pies. They've got hundreds of thousands, millions of SKUs. They've got to write product, even something simple as product descriptions for all of these products. They can't possibly do that. And they can't possibly do that in the style that they might have, right? And I can train the model to write a product description in my style. Quite incredible and hugely time-saving.
Hugely time-saving. And then now we're getting into SEO, right? We're helping put content on the page that Google can start to index or understand what's on the page about that product description that no other manufacturer will have. And then we can start to sell that and move that with our own voice and tone. So that's a great example of how you can scale something as simple as boring product descriptions into something kind of interesting that eventually makes you money.
You mentioned this, you can go wrong. How do you advise someone put in safeguards to ensure that it doesn't go too wrong, or at least that they catch where it has? How do you think about that?
I think of AI as like a really eager intern that never gets tired. But at the same time, you want to make sure that intern, as eager as they may be, can definitely go off track. So I think there's a way you want to be thinking about the the way the intern, how you verify what it's kind of producing and how much risk you would assign it. So for example, you may not have the intern write your financial forecast for your board meeting, but it may help you understand like where there's most waste over the last quarter and something like that as well. So I think that's a good one. The thing is the interface and the way that the robots return to you, it sounds that the tone, it sounds so certain that it's easy to believe. You kind of find yourself like nodding along, like, wait, time out. That's not right. Like that doesn't make sense. But the way it's written and the way the prompts come back from the responses can make it feel like it's really certain. So there's definitely still a case for having the experts kind of review.
Yeah, I actually did a test the other day. I asked one of the models, I won't say which, to count the number of characters in a sentence, and it got it wrong, which I did not think it could possibly get wrong, but it did. So you do definitely have to be careful. Jake, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been such a great conversation.